to our May Lunch and Learn. I'm Joanna. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach for the Coalition. For those of you who are new here, very, very excited for the panel and presentations that we have today. I'm going to be highlighting some great coalition partners and some of the work that they're doing regionally up north in Washoe County to build capacity for supportive housing. But I won't spend too much time. As you guys know, for those of you who come, we only have 45 minutes. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to our first speaker, Catrina Peters, who's the Homeless Services Coordinator for Washoe County. And she's going to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing, and then hand it over to Brooke Page, the Regional Director Southwest for Corporation for Supportive Housing, to give a presentation on their recent work. And then Christine Hess, Chief Financial Officer with the Housing Division, is going to talk about a little bit of a local update we have for AB 310. So very, very excited. Welcome everybody. Keep putting your names in the chat. And also just, if you have any questions, we're going to have some time for questions at the end. So go ahead and use that Q&A feature or the chat feature if you have questions. All right, take it away, Catrina.
Thank you so much. Am I good to share my screen? Is that showing my slides okay? All right, great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. We are really excited to share the work that we're doing in Washoe County to increase the number of permanent supportive housing units. And I'm just so happy Brooke and Christine could join me today. They are both amazing partners, and this work would not be possible without them. Yeah, so first I wanted to just start by briefly introducing Washoe County Housing and Homeless Services. I'm our Regional Homeless Services Coordinator with the team, but the Housing and Homeless Services group is relatively new. We're about to celebrate our third birthday, which we're very excited about. We have a mission of working to lead the community to build a system that's capable of housing people experiencing homelessness, and we want to see that homelessness becomes rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. We have kind of categorized our work into three main areas. The first is our work to lead regional governance and coordination. And we are the collaborative applicant, and I serve as the COC coordinator for our Northern Nevada Continuum of Care. That is our HUD-funded program, really working to coordinate all of our HUD-funded programs and ensure that policy is aligning with that HUD work as well. We have a really fantastic leadership group that meets monthly. We also host a monthly kind of come one, come all general membership group. And if folks are in Northern Nevada and you're not part of that work, please reach out to me directly. We would love to include you in that. We also lead our Built for Zero work here in Washoe County. Built for Zero is a national initiative. There's about 120 communities across the country working on the Built for Zero initiative within their community. This provided us some really great structure in two areas. The first is coordinating our street outreach work, and the second is getting our data into a centralized database and providing monthly metrics. That has really allowed us to dig into trends like inflow and outflow. Historically, our community did an annual point in time count, but a once per year count really just gives us limited insight. So that Built for Zero work has really helped us sort of dig into those details. In August of last year, we were also awarded our quality data recognition from the Built for Zero community, which was really exciting. That means that 90% of our communities in Washoe County are entering data into that centralized database, which is key to us being able to really, one, know that we've got comprehensive coverage across the community, but when we're looking at those trends, know that that is representative of what's going on here locally. That work also really helped us hone in on the need for permanent supportive housing in Washoe County. And Brooke's going to talk in more detail because they did an amazing needs assessment, but this Built for Zero work was kind of the start of us realizing that permanent supportive housing really is our top needed resource. We also operate several facilities here locally. We have the Our Place campus, that's the Women and Family Shelter here in Washoe County. We have the Nevada Cares campus and the Safe Camp. Those are both low barrier housing first programs. The Cares campus has about 549 beds, Safe Camp is 50 units. So really quite a bit of capacity there at the Nevada Cares campus. We also have our street outreach work that we're really excited about. Two members of our team are the case management component of the Sheriff's Office HOPE team that's doing that street outreach work. We also have folks doing outreach out of the Nevada Cares campus. We have an amazing case management team both at the Nevada Cares campus and our place, working on those housing-focused plans to get folks moving into housing from that emergency shelter. And then we also have a behavioral health team that operates at both facilities doing crisis stabilization. They've also been able to implement some more therapeutic options, doing some groups, which we've been really excited about. Housing team, we have some tenancy support folks that are doing some amazing work, and I'll share some stats at the end. We have an affordable housing trust fund. We were lucky to be awarded $2 million of ARPA funds that will be making recommendations on who's receiving those funding, who's receiving that funding at the May 28th Board of County Commissioners meeting. And then finally, we have our permanent supportive housing work. So we're working on building a 50-unit building, and I'll show you some more details on that. But just acknowledging that we're very focused on the desperate need to expand permanent supportive housing here in our community. We like to also share this slide, kind of identifying the regional priorities and the jurisdictional leads for those specific priorities. In the summer of 2021, we had some really great regional conversations on who's going to take the lead in what area, making sure that we're being as effective as possible and that we're not duplicating work. The outcome of those conversations is that Washoe County was designated as the lead on homelessness and emergency shelter, and really focusing in on efforts targeted at that 0 to 30% area median income population. So we operate our emergency shelter facilities. We're also focused on permanent supportive housing, and some of our work kind of touches up on that affordable housing space. We've got the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but when we look at Reno and Sparks, they are really focusing their efforts on that 30% AMI and above, looking at the market rate rental housing, looking at affordable housing, and also looking at home ownership and focusing their efforts in that section of this visual. To move into our permanent supportive housing programs, I wanted to just share a little bit about the Nevada Cares campus. It is something that has gotten kind of the most media attention that most folks have heard about. It is our low barrier emergency shelter. As I mentioned, we've got 549 beds. 396 of those are bunk beds. 153 are what we call our cubbies. It's a 6-foot pony wall. Folks have their own assigned bed, foot locker, giving folks some dignity and space. To be in a cubby, you have to be engaged in case management. So we're really trying to entice folks to work with us in that capacity. We also have our 50-unit safe camp. We have our resource center that opened December 1. Day services are available at the resource center 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. It also serves as our inclement weather location, and we operate 84 beds in the winter as our cold weather overflow. And then opening in spring of 2025, we'll have our 50-unit permanent supportive housing, which we're very excited about. To kind of get a bird's eye view of the campus for those of you who haven't been at the facility, you see here in green phase 2, which is building out some of the much needed infrastructure at that emergency shelter, providing permanent showers, restrooms, and laundry buildings. Initially, the CARES campus had some temporary facilities. They were not built for the number of people we have at that facility, so we were very excited to get construction completed to provide those basic necessities. Phase 3 is our intake and resource center. The resource center is completed. We opened December 1. In July of 2024, we'll be looking to open what we call the Welcome Center. That'll be the central intake location for the emergency shelter. And then here in red, you'll see phase 4. This is our supportive housing building. So this is 50 units of permanent supportive housing that is located on the CARES campus. We broke ground in November, and this project was only possible through the support of the Housing Division through a $22 million Home Means Nevada grant. So we are incredibly thankful for the funding that provided. Supportive housing was always in the vision for the CARES campus, but without the funding, constructing that building would not have been possible. So just huge thank you to our Housing Division partners. You'll also see here shaded in yellow, construction intending to start shortly for accessible space supportive housing. So they are one of 2 entities that we're recommending for funding for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for 50 units of supportive housing that will be on the CARES campus in this kind of yellow shaded area. They also are intending to build 70 units of affordable housing on this parcel as well. And then behind it in green, you have our safe camp. So for our housing initiatives, we also have an emergency rental assistance program. We were awarded just over $6 million from the Treasury. We've gotten over $5 million of that out as of the end of last calendar year. We were really thankful to have this emergency rental assistance. It was really intended in kind of COVID relief times, but that money is dwindling. And we are regionally, I think, a bit nervous about a lot of these COVID funds being expended that have been used to help in a homeless prevention or helping get folks housed. We also have, as I mentioned, our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have 2 projects that we are recommending for award at the next week's Board of County Commissioners meeting. That is to fund units that'll be in that 0-30% AMI. We also really specifically targeted these funds for permanent supportive housing. Again, our data really shows that this is the top need. Brooke's going to speak to that in more detail. But we're using these funds in a very targeted way to build out that permanent supportive housing that otherwise just does not pencil. We also have a tenancy support program. Currently, it's focused on people who have an emergency housing voucher. We've served 77 people so far. We have a 92% retention rate of folks that we're serving in that capacity, which is really an amazing statistic for folks who were formerly homeless, and I think really speaks to the power of that support and those wraparound services. We also were able to recently add a Silver Summit case manager who will be working with folks who are covered by Silver Summit to provide that tenancy support. And then, as I mentioned, we have our 50 units that are opening in spring of 2025. And we are lucky to have the support of Brooke Page and the Corporation for Supportive Housing team to continue the work identified in the needs assessment. And with that, I will hand it over to Brooke.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really great presentation, Catrina. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you all see that? Did that come in?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have, as Catrina mentioned, the Washoe County is really intentional about this conversation, and it's an important one that requires an intention in order to address a really important need. And they commissioned CSH to come in and really help address this issue. Having somebody from Nevada that is working on this issue, sitting on a lot of tables to help have a conversation, I think is an important one. And because I'm not an expert in all the things affordable housing or supportive housing, I'm grateful to have the bench of over 175 plus CSHers who are able to come in at any given time to help us address whatever the challenge or the issue is. And so for over 30 years, we've been scaling supportive housing across the country. And so what we are focusing on here in Nevada, we've got this challenge. And so I'm going to start off today just by giving a really quick overview of what supportive housing is before getting into the data that we found in Washoe County and why this is an important business case that needs to be made to our taxpayers, to our elected officials, and to the folks that are really making the decisions around where resources should be allocated and what resources should be allocated to this issue. And why supportive housing? Well, what you'll notice on the screen right now is data that represents the folks that are at various different income levels in Washoe County. This data represents the current fair market rent for an efficiency unit all the way up to a 4-bedroom, and how much an affordable housing unit looks at these different income bedroom rent. So at efficiency, it's $1,000 to afford $1,460 to afford an efficiency studio in Washoe County. But you'll notice that even at 80% area median income, a person cannot afford that unless they're going to be paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And so this kind of just shows you where 30% falls nowhere can anybody afford 30% of their area median income, or 50%, let alone, I mean, even 80% you can't really afford for a household of four. You can't even really afford a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. So this is an important issue. Affordability is an important issue. In addition to affordability, the rising cost of rent, the rising cost of housing, stagnant wages, insufficient affordable housing stock, inadequate funding to address this issue, inadequate funding for services, also difficult policies that create disparate impact on certain populations, that create racial disparities and cause racial impact on certain populations, and also not in my backyardism are all of the things that we are grappling with when we are addressing the causes of homelessness. And so we have to think about this in a holistic way in order to address the solutions. And so we are using supportive housing as an important intervention to do that. And so for those who have not heard of supportive housing is an intervention that has been proven. It's evidence-based, and there's a lot of research that shows that when you put somebody in a home, which is that circle in the middle of this wheel, an affordable place where they're not paying more than 30% of their household income on housing. And for folks who have a lot of challenges, if they've experienced homelessness, if they're coming out of institutional settings, if they have a disabling condition or different barriers or challenges, when you wrap those folks with services and you keep them stably housed, there are remarkable outcomes that are achieved. And essentially, that's what supportive housing is. It's providing folks with a stable place to live and providing them with the wraparound services to get access to a home and to stay stably housed. But that very tenant-centered approach is what makes supportive housing an important intervention. And it's for folks that need it. Okay, so this is a very important intervention that is not for everybody. This is for an intervention that is for folks that have complex needs, complex challenges, barriers to getting access to housing. We're addressing chronic homelessness, intellectual developmental disabilities, people with high needs, people that are cycling in and out of our high cost systems because they may be using those systems because we don't have enough housing. So this is an important conversation that we need to be having. And the components that make this intervention work are, one, housing stock. So we need to make sure that we've got enough housing to house people. And that's why the Washoe County community and the Washoe County community really having a conversation about this is important, because we need to address the housing stock. And so, engaging tenants that need this, ensuring that we have housing, but housing that's also affordable, and providing people with the tenant protections, with a lease that gives them those protections to stay stably housed, but then also the autonomy to make the decisions and the agency to make decisions that meets their individual needs is really important. And also the services to help ensure that people can stay stably housed are all of the components that are really important, because when we do this work and we do it well, we know that this works because the research, it's been proven time and time again that when we put people in a home and we wrap them with services, they stay housed. People increase their income and they become productive members of our community and start being tax-paying citizens that then contribute to our community. They help, housing is healthcare. They increase their if they have disabling conditions, people improve their health, they improve their mental health, they get access to treatment, people get access to their children if they've had their children maybe were disconnected, we create communities. So all of these things, there's a rippling effect just by putting folks in a home. And so this is an important conversation that, is a ripple effect. And the ways in which we do this, it has to be done by creating the capital, because we have to have housing, so the capital stack to help build it. So things like our low-income housing tax credits and the resources as Catrina mentioned, the Home Means Nevada Fund has been a really important resource for our community to help provide that capital stack to build housing. But then we have to have the operating resources in order to help provide that rental assistance to keep people in their homes so they can afford it. You saw how expensive it is to live in Washoe County. So if somebody can't afford to, not be rent burdened, there has to be a subsidy of some sort to keep that rent affordable. So providing that subsidy to be the difference between what somebody can afford and what the rent is where that operating support comes from. And then the services is the really important piece that also helps somebody get off the streets if they're homeless, get out of an institutional setting, and then get into a home and then help them stay stably housed. Maybe they need access to treatment, or maybe they need help with their activities of daily living. This is that support to keep them in the home and get them stabilized. And so we need resources like Medicaid is an important resource that can help provide services, or a new resource that we're super excited about that Christine will talk about, Assembly Bill 310, that can help us with service funding. And so Washoe County came to CSH because they were really interested and this slide was a really important one that helped us make an argument for the services that we didn't have in our state. Supportive housing wasn't being built, especially from a single site perspective, because a lot of people were saying we don't have service funding in our state. And so we tangentially were telling folks that, it's having 3 days at UMC, and where I live in Clark County, it costs the same in 2021 to keep somebody in the emergency room at UMC, costs the same as 3 months at Clark County Detention Center, is the same amount of money to put somebody in a home with services for a whole year, is the same amount of money for 1 year as which is supportive housing. And so this business case was really important, and an important one that I think resonated with a lot of people, because the cost of doing nothing, the cost of keeping people cycling in and out of high cost systems is what we're doing anyway. Taxpayers are paying a lot of money to do nothing and keeping people cycling. Why not put people in a home and be able to just, be able to stabilize them with housing. And so this is the argument, and Washoe County approached us and was like, how do we make this business case in our community similar to what we have in Clark County? And so there's been a lot of narrative about, homelessness, people creating sanctioned encampments and creating a lot of different issues around homelessness. And, there's topics about the rise of homelessness and the need to really address this issue. And how do we do that in a way that's going to be, strategic? How do we make informed decisions that we can ensure our resources are going to the right place? And how do we track it? So that way we know that what we're doing is working and that people are actually getting housed, staying housed, and we can make sure that it's making sense. And so that's what brought about the business case and the supportive housing needs assessment that we commissioned. And so the supportive housing needs assessment essentially we spent about 6 to 7 months talking with people with lived experience, talking with the service provider community, as well as pulling data that Washoe County has been working really hard to ensure data quality in the community and ensuring that as many people as possible, as many organizations as possible are putting data in their homeless management information system database to track who actually is getting served in the homeless response system. And so we pulled that data, how many units are currently being available in the community, who actually is getting services. And this provided us with the information that we needed in order to come up with the information for this report. So some of the key findings from the report was, one, there are racial disparities that exist in the homeless response system. And so one of those database information, this slide here kind of shows what those disparities look like. And this shows that although there are a lot of, there's various different racial groups within the homeless response system, that based off of the population in the system, there is an overrepresentation of Black people and American Indian, Alaskan Native people in the homeless response system compared to the general population. And so what you'll see is, like for Black people, they are represented, 16% are actually in the homeless population, but there's only 3% of Black people in Washoe County. So that overrepresentation shows a disparity and something that needs to be considered and addressed as we're thinking about and having these conversations. It doesn't negate the fact that there are a lot of white people in the homeless response system. It also shows that there isn't an overrepresentation of white people in the homeless response system. So those are just data points that when we disaggregate data by race, when we have these conversations, we can start keeping track of it and put this data and information, so we can, figure out why do these data points exist and how do we address them. And so additionally, what the supportive housing needs assessment showed was, one, here is how many people we're talking about. So number one, we need to know the number. Without the number, we're just having conversation and we're talking anecdotally instead of actually speaking about specifically the issue that we're trying to address. So now we know that we've got 1,071 homeless chronic individuals. We've got 3,354 non-chronic individuals, and we've got 189 homeless families that represent the homeless population. And this is from 2023 when we pulled this information. Now, CSH, we used our national assumptions, and our assumptions say that based on this information, we believe that 964 individuals are going to need permanent supportive housing. 335 non-chronic individuals need supportive housing, and 30 families need supportive housing. And so this is what we modeled moving forward, the rest of this information. And then the difference, we felt that, Washoe County also needs to develop a system to divert people from ever entering the homeless response system, by creating a diversion program, and really working on problem solving tools and addressing and providing resources so folks can stay in their home for as long as they possibly can. And so some of those national assumptions here provide information about, 15% of people are going to self-resolve on their own, and 15% of families will be able to self-resolve on their own. And so this information, kind of helped with that assumption of how folks navigate throughout the homeless response system. We looked at their current inventory and how many units the Washoe County is currently contributing to the homeless issue. And here we saw emergency shelter beds along with transitional housing beds, and then the permanent supportive housing units that currently exist in the system, as well as rapid rehousing vouchers or slots that are used in the community. And so this provides the current inventory. With the current inventory, we also looked at temporary places for people to stay. And we consider anything temporary if there's a time limit where at some point somebody has to move, they have to find somewhere else, it's considered temporary. So here you can kind of show what that current existing stock is, how often that stock turns over in a year, and then the utilization of that stock. And so we showed that the utilization of transitional housing was really low, especially for families. It's not very utilized very often. And the number available annually, that's how many of that temporary shelter is available. And so this kind of shows the total unmet need for transitional housing. Here you'll notice that the annual need shows for individuals 91, for families 13. We have 458 available annually based on the annual turnover rate for individuals. And so that equates to actually having an access of 168 individual transitional housing beds. So that means we have way more transitional housing beds than we actually need in the community. So we shouldn't be putting more resources into transitional housing beds if we already have an access of 168. But without this data point, you may have funders who are going to continue to fund more transitional housing instead of rethinking that priority when resources should actually be going to other interventions. And so here we show the availability now of permanent housing. And so this is where folks can stay as long as they need it. Again, permanent housing. And so in the community, you have a stock of individual housing of 129 units. For families, you have 101 units. For rapid rehousing for individuals, 66, rapid rehousing for families, 18. And so the annual turnover rate here is only 5%, 3%. And there's only one that turns over and for rapid rehousing. So you see that these units don't turn over very, very often because the intervention is so effective and they work. People stay in housing and you see a 93%, 94% utilization rate. And so here we show that there's only available annually 15 units come available for permanent supportive housing for individuals, 9 for families. And because vouchers don't turn over, you can see that that's all we had was 66 rapid rehousing vouchers. And so this now shows you the unmet need of how many units are needed in Washoe County based on what's available and based on how many people need this intervention. And so the unmet need in Washoe County for individuals is 1,284 people need supportive housing, 21 families, 1,644 individuals need rapid rehousing, 81 families need rapid rehousing, and the community needs 751 individuals need diversion at some point in the community, and 32 families need diversion. And so we took that unmet need and we modeled out some data, and we created this business case. And this is the number that we used in order to sort of tell the story of how much it would cost if we've housed all these folks. And so using data based off of an existing project that got developed in Washoe County, we took the cost per unit for that project and we did a 50-50 split, 50 to develop for the need and 50 if we leverage the existing market of landlords that are we were already working within the community to house folks in the scattered site model. And so to develop 50% of the units that are needed, it would cost $277 million to build. And then to operate those units with the rental assistance to house 1,284 people, it's for $10,000 per unit per year, would cost $13 million. To provide services for those folks would be $12 million. And so the grand total on an annual basis is $50 million a year to provide operating and services for the folks that are needed for Washoe County. But the one-time cost to build would be roughly $300 million to build the housing stock for 50% of the folks that need the capital to be built. So in closing, I just want to finish by just kind of talking about this business case because that was really important for Washoe County. They wanted to understand the business case to do this. And so we know that this is the comparison for what right now is being how much it costs to, again, cycle in and out of the jail, in and out of the hospital annually. If somebody, is doing that on a regular basis because they have no housing, that's where they go maybe for their health care. And what this equates to now in Washoe County is 8 days in the hospital is the same as 4 months in jail equals 1 year of supportive housing. And so we believe we've made the business case in Washoe County and the argument that this intervention is more important than investing more money into transitional housing, where we know we don't need that because we have enough of it. And we know that from a business perspective, we're resolving our business owner concerns because we hear from business owners that it's impacting their businesses when there's homelessness in front of their buildings. Taxpayers are frustrated if they're paying for homelessness, but now we've got a tax base that we can probably get back into the workforce if they're housed. We can reduce visible homelessness. We can improve safety and sanitation if we house people, and we can increase our workforce if we get people back into a home and get them retrained and get them back into the workforce. So we have this really important win-win situation when we house folks. So I'll just stop there. I know I'm out of time, Joanna, and I'll pass it over to Christine.
Thank you so much. What an amazing presentation. I love seeing how all the pieces fit together to build a more holistic community overall. And I love that housing is at the center. Christine Hess from the Nevada Housing Division is going to give us also a quick update on the AB 310, the Permanent Supportive Housing Development Fund that was passed in legislation last year that Brooke and Catrina has mentioned. So I'll just hand that over and then we'll get to questions.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, it's such a privilege to be here among some of my most favorite colleagues and champions for affordable housing in the state. Good afternoon, everyone. So Christine Hess, I am now 10 months, almost to the day of my anniversary of being with the Housing Division. I am the CFO, so you might say, why on earth is the CFO talking about Assembly Bill 310 and the Supportive Housing Development Fund? That's because I had the pleasure and privilege to sit alongside Brooke during the legislative session in my previous role with the efforts of the coalition, really the whole team of the coalition, including their government affairs, Mindy Elliott, to work on this bill with Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe-Moreno. So I am intimately familiar with the intent of this bill with the law that exists now because of the good work. So Assembly Bill 310 that was signed into law by our governor, which was also an incredible moment, and we had an opportunity for a bill signing. Assembly Bill 310 established the Supportive Housing Development Fund. This fund is really, and the intent of the fund is a pilot program, right? So it's not something that exists in the state currently. The state is not investing in this intentionally of this type of funding with services attached to housing. So Assembly Bill 310, it defined three things and objectives, which was to develop supportive housing. As I answer the phone a lot for developers, it does not fund the bricks and sticks, right? That's what LIHTC does, low-income housing tax credits, or other financial resources. The intent of this funding is to come alongside permanent housing to fund the services and operations to make a project pencil. That is the primary goal, and what 30 million of the $32.2 million that was allocated of general funds does. And thank you, Amanda, so much for dropping in. If you'd like to read the full bill, I'm not going to go through the full bill, but you can read the text as enrolled there in that link. Additionally, Assembly Bill 310, another objective of it was to build capacity in our state. So we are doing some supportive housing work in the state, but not enough, as you hear our shortage. And we also don't necessarily have all the groups that have capacity and understanding of how to provide the services in conjunction with the housing for supportive housing to keep people stably housed. And then thirdly, Assembly Bill 310 provided funding requires also that we evaluate the program and measure our results, right? So importantly, we see here, pretty exciting, Brooke, I think this is maybe the first time you are releasing the information for Washoe County, but you see here some data on need, right? So you can imagine now that Assembly Bill 310, as it goes through and funds different projects in various parts of the state, we'll be able to potentially compare next to the work of CSH here, the need versus what we're doing. And I also just want to share, because I thought this was interesting, we brought it forward in the last advisory committee on housing. The Home Means Nevada initiative, I dropped in the chat. Catrina mentioned how we're funding some permanent supportive housing that Washoe County is building. I think it's 50 units, Catrina. Also, Line Drive, that project there was also funded by Home Means Nevada initiative. Again, that was again for the construction, not services and operations, but for the actual construction of the Home Means Nevada initiative. Really exciting. This division that was pre-me, the division chose to really focus on extremely low income, and of the 2,500 new development units, don't hold me to task on the exact number, but approximately 2,500 new units funded by Home Means Nevada initiative, 363 of those are permanent supportive housing, right? That is amazing. I just want to give kudos to my division leadership before me for actually prioritizing supportive housing with this once in a lifetime funding. And I know some of them, the projects funded are anxiously awaiting AB 310. So let me dig in and give an update where that is, because even though they're building it, they're like, yikes, now we've got to figure out how to fund the services and potentially support some operations if we don't have a voucher for some of our extremely low income individuals. So per Assembly Bill 310, the bill notes that the division shall adopt regulations. So it's taken me a while. Again, it's under my charge, not because you'll all be working with me, but because I do know the intent of the bill and know it so well from the work during the legislative session. I don't know the process of the state, so it took me a little while to understand how that happens and get my bearings under me. However, we did recently post regulations and workshop those regulations per the requirement of the law. So we moved through an initial draft with the Legislative Counsel Bureau, which is part of the process. At the workshop, it was just last week, May 16th. We had over 70 people, which was fantastic. In fact, one of our commenters was our own champion Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno of the bill's sponsor. The feedback was relatively positive. A couple changes I anticipate that we'll see going into the next step, which is a hearing on those regulations, and we have scheduled it and publicly noticed it. That hearing will be on June 18th at 11:30 a.m. What you'll see posted right now does not reflect any revisions. So we'll put those revisions in, and at that point, have this public hearing. And assuming things go well, they would then get adopted by the division administrator. And then the next step would be to get them approved by the Legislative Commission. So that's the process. If you get a little schoolhouse rock for everybody, in this case, not how a bill becomes a law, but how regulations become adopted. So that's one process that is moving along. If you look at the regulations that you have there in the chat posted, what you'll see is that regulations are fairly broad. They certainly capture the broader scope of the bill, but remember, this is a pilot program. So the division also released a draft program design where you'll really see the intent of the legislation shine through, right? These funds are only for projects that are supporting individuals and or families below 30% of area median income, right? That was very specific throughout the legislative hearing. This was for the extremely low income population, as Brooke noted in her presentation, really the space where there is just not housing available. In Washoe, not just Washoe County, but statewide. It's our state's greatest deficit. It's what we have the greatest deficit in the country of, is that housing for extremely low income individuals. You'll also see in the program design, $30 million is divided into two different buckets currently. This is a working draft, everyone. So $30 million is divided into two buckets, with one bucket specific to funding supportive services that come alongside housing. The other bucket that allows for also some operation support and services, because we heard multiple times throughout the hearing, and I've heard just since sitting in this chair, that not only is there not funding enough for services, but there's also not funding enough for operations, which might include like rental assistance. So if your tenants don't have a voucher, or your project doesn't have a voucher, a housing choice voucher from a housing authority, for example, it may be a struggle even just with service funding. So we accounted for that currently, remember it's just a draft, with two different buckets at $15 million each. And the idea was during the session, and the hope of the division is to really understand, especially when we get to the evaluation component, potentially other funding sources, and maybe they're already here in the state that aren't being utilized to help keep people stably housed. The current program design also sets aside $1.7 million for capacity building, which includes some planning and training grants, and organizational capacity, as well as statewide. And then again, the program measurement and evaluation at about $700,000. So you can take a look. I'm not going to go into detail on the program design. You can take a look at it, see what's allowed there. And, you know, we were just talking about how long we keep going. So I'm going to be quiet, Joanna, so you have a little time for questions. I am planning a roundtable, a public roundtable. I will notice it. I have not scheduled it yet. It will be before June 18th. Thank goodness I don't need to notice it like 3 weeks. But also I will drop in the chat the email. The notice of this roundtable will go out through the grants team's public parties list, interested parties list. So I'll just drop in the email, in the chat, that email so you can sign up.
Amazing, amazing work. I know many people on this call have heard me talk about how much I believe in supportive housing before, because I have a background in being a case manager at purpose-built supportive housing buildings. And so I'm very, very passionate about it. I really believe in this intervention, so I love talking about it. But I will let others, if anybody has questions, I would love to, I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but please drop those in there. Happy to stay on the call until 1, as we do every month now, even though we are technically scheduled till 12:45. There's so much amazing work happening and passion for this work in the state, and I love that. We never run out of things to talk about. We never run out of the conversation never falls flat before we're due to be over. So thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just double check here. So yes, we will send the slides out and the link to the recording to all the registrants after today, once we get it uploaded. This is a really, really amazing work, you guys. Thank you so much. I'll ask a question actually while we're waiting for other folks, even though we're running late. I was just wondering what strategies have proven most successful in securing funding and resources for long-term operation in other places. I know, Catrina, you're probably looking at other places as you figure out what to do moving forward to address this need now that we have the data. And Brooke, I know CSH works in many different communities that have different systems and system coordination in place. So do you have any kind of best practices that you think might be something to consider for Nevada? Christine, also the division, you probably look at other examples as well. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about that.
So I guess I'll go first and just kind of add my 2 cents, which is that I think we're going to have to be really creative and look at braiding funding opportunities. So I think, you know, using our 50-unit building as an example, Home Means Nevada, we were incredibly lucky to get that funding for bricks and sticks. AB 310 is a great opportunity for operations and services. Thank you, Nevada Housing Division. And there's also kind of some other opportunities around pursuing project-based vouchers. There's a couple other opportunities that have been talked about, but I think further details are still kind of to be seen. Also, the HUD COC grants are another opportunity. Here locally in Northern Nevada, we've really tried to cultivate new applicants. Because it is a HUD grant, there are some restrictions on it, and it can be a little bit administratively challenging, but it is an opportunity to fund those badly needed permanent supportive housing units.
Yeah, and I'll just say this is an important topic that requires intention and priority, as Washoe County is doing. And what I've seen across the country that is effective is when a rallying of jurisdictions are coming together and prioritizing this process and prioritizing this effort by leveraging their existing entitlement funds and prioritizing this population, prioritizing this type of housing, and putting out joint notice of funding applications and targeting that, they want to see developers in the community, kind of come in and apply for this type of effort. And so I think, putting out there that this is a priority with our existing tools, and then leveraging, as Catrina mentioned, and braiding existing resources, and then really thinking about what money are we leaving on the table. And so are we actually leveraging all of the federal funds and resources that we currently have at our disposal? Are we maximizing that for the most impactful interventions that are getting us the most bang for our buck, and having that conversation as well?
I'm not going to add anything more than housing finance agencies, which is what the housing division is, don't necessarily dabble in supportive housing. They are, meaning it is complex and intense. I would just add that I've neglected to mention Assembly Bill 310 does also point to the division's consultation with the Interagency Council on homelessness to housing. That council has various state agencies at the table. And my hope, although, the poor things, they've been waiting for more exciting updates from the division. But my hope is that engagement will lead to some light bulbs from even our state agency partners as they're coming across funding sources And so I think this is a process to me, but additionally, what are we leaving on the table, or how could we more effectively use some of the current resources to keep people stably housed?
Mhm.
Yeah, that definitely, you could really see that floating to the top of your presentation, Brooke, and the work that you're doing in Washoe County is how the importance of systems coordination to really make this intervention work, especially scale. There has to be some intentional drive and momentum around it to really get these types of projects built. And we know that they are evidence-based and they work, so that we are really working towards long-term solutions towards ending chronic homelessness with this intervention. So
Mhm.
thank you all so much.
Joanna, can I
Yeah.
add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because I have an audience here, the division is also currently working to deploy Section 811 funds. These are funds that have been with the state, but are very, very challenging to deploy because of the federal regulations. But we are really working hard to deploy these funds and not lose these funds. So some of you that are developers may see a request on potentially properties that may work together. I could see in the future where if we can do this successfully as a state, perhaps Section 811 comes alongside our supportive housing development fund to fund the operation. Section 811 funds rental assistance. It's more specific than that. There's experts here on this call, but it's been a challenge across the country to actually access these funds, but hopefully we'll figure that here out in Nevada. But again, if you're on the grants interested parties list, those items will come through.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Christine. We have one question, and since it seems like a quick one, I'll just go through it before we close. And it's from Kelly Beavers. And how can the Lindsay Institute, and I think this can apply to all of us, support you all ahead of and during the legislative session? I know from a coalition perspective, staying engaged in the work that we're doing, becoming a member, so you're updated on legislative updates when we have calls to action, and engaging in our policy conversations and conference is one. But for you three, what are some specific ways that folks can help?
Excellent question. I would definitely agree as far as joining, especially the policy committee conversations at the Housing Coalition. And I also think the Interagency Council on Homelessness to Housing is an important body to engage with. And so maybe we can share just the information of how folks can get access to those meetings and stay engaged on how these issues of homelessness and to housing interface.
I lean on the coalition for my updates and bringing all the stakeholders together that certainly the division doesn't have the capacity to do. So thanks, Joanna, Amanda, Maurice, for all of your work.
Thank you.
And I'll argue that as well. As a local jurisdiction, we are sometimes limited in our legislative activities, and really the Housing Coalition has just done such an amazing job leading that charge.
Thank you so much. We will have our policy forums again this year in July. We'll do one up in Reno and one north, so stay tuned for that. If you're on the mailing list, sign up. Well, if you registered for this, you're on the mailing list, so you'll get those. But thank you so much to our speakers, Brooke, Christine, Catrina. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing with us today. Next month, we'll be joined by the Nevada Clean Energy Fund, and we'll be talking about clean energy and financing and development and some extra funding resources that might be available. So stay tuned for more information on that. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.